You won't believe what happened next. The man who sang about sunshine, mountains, and country roads, songs that felt like a warm hug, was quietly walking toward a tragedy that didn't have to happen. The world knew him as a gentle voice for peace and nature. Few knew the turbulence under the smile, the pressure under the fame, and the risks that finally caught up with him. This is the story of how John Denver climbed from shy military kid to global icon, and why his final seconds in the sky still feel so heartbreakingly avoidable. He came into the world as Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. on December 31st, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico. His dad, Henry John Dutch Deutschendorf Sr., was the real deal, an accomplished U.S. Air Force pilot known for speed records in the B-58 Hustler and a reputation that echoed across air bases. For a kid, that might sound exciting. But for John, it meant cardboard boxes and goodbyes, just as soon as he'd learned classmates' names. Arizona, Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas, the map kept changing, and with it, his chance at feeling like he truly belonged anywhere. Then came the gift that changed everything. An old 1910 Gibson guitar placed in his hands by his grandmother when he was 11. Think about that. One simple instrument, and suddenly the boy who never stayed long enough to make friends found something that stayed with him. In Tucson, he joined the boys' chorus, learning harmony, breathing with a crowd, hearing his voice blend into something bigger. By high school, he was standing in corners of coffee houses with that guitar, singing folk songs to rooms that actually quieted to listen. For the first time, John felt anchored. At home, though, life wasn't soft. Dutch Deutschendorf believed in discipline like other people believe in gravity. He wanted precision, order, excellence. John had a gentle spirit, a dreamer's heart. That's oil and water under one roof. But they did have one fragile bridge between them, flying. Father and son bonded in the sky. John learned to handle small planes, feeling the thrill that his dad must have felt in the cockpit. For a moment, they weren't arguing. They were gliding. College tried to claim him. Texas Tech University, architecture, straight lines, clear rules, neat blueprints. But at night, John slipped into music with a local folk group called the Alpine Trio. The drafting table felt like homework. The stage felt like home. It didn't take long for him to admit the truth. Music wasn't a hobby. It was the compass pointing to who he was supposed to be. So he did the scary thing people always tell you not to do. He left school and chased the dream to Los Angeles. Picture it, thousands of singers with the same plan, the same guitar case, the same "please just give me one shot" look. John had two advantages: work ethic and stubborn hope. He landed an audition for the Chad Mitchell Trio, competing with hundreds to replace Chad Mitchell himself. Against the odds, he got it. Suddenly, he was touring, recording, learning how to own a stage, instead of just renting it for a few minutes. On those endless trips, he started writing his own songs. One in particular came during a lonely layover in Washington, D.C., a simple tune about leaving and longing. He called it "Babe, I Hate to Go." Not exactly a title that leaps off a record sleeve. He retitled it "Leaving on a Jet Plane," and although John's own version didn't catch fire, fate took a hand when Peter, Paul, and Mary recorded it. By late 1969, their cover topped the charts. And just like that, the quiet kid from air bases suddenly had credibility as a songwriter. He also realized his birth name, Deutschendorf, wasn't exactly radio-friendly. Inspired by the mountains he adored, he took a new stage name, John Denver. Momentum is a beautiful thing when you've waited your whole life to feel it. In 1971, John Denver released Poems, Prayers, and Promises, and tucked inside was the song that would become a second national anthem for long drives, "Take Me Home, Country Roads." He wrote it with Bill Danoff and Taffy Nivert, and at first the track wasn't a slam dunk. Recording issues, doubts, the usual headwinds. But smart people pushed to get it on the radio. And when it hit the airwaves, it grew like a sunrise. The chorus, simple, yearning, honest, found people where they lived, whether their home was a farm road or a city block. Years later, it would be adopted as one of West Virginia's official state songs. But even before that, it belonged to anyone who ever felt homesick. The success opened doors. In 1972, John released Rocky Mountain High, an ode to Colorado's wild peaks and quiet nights. The title track became a kind of hymn for people who believed nature could still save you if you just turn off the noise and listen. Colorado eventually made Rocky Mountain High an official state song too, which tells you just how deeply it resonated. And then came the mid-70s, John Denver's golden run. If you were around then, you couldn't miss it. Within a remarkably short window, John delivered a run of smashes that owned the radio. Sunshine on My Shoulders, Annie's Song, a pure, soaring love note to his first wife, Annie Martell, written in a flash of inspiration. Thank God I'm a Country Boy, a jam that turns a fiddle into a celebration. I'm Sorry, tender and aching. Meanwhile, his album sold and sold. Back Home Again, Wind Song, and a greatest hits collection that ended up among his label's biggest sellers ever. His look, wire-rimmed glasses, shaggy blonde hair, embroidered Western shirts, became instantly recognizable. He wasn't just a star. He was part of the cultural wallpaper. When you reach that level, Hollywood calls. In 1977, John made his acting debut opposite George Burns in Oh God, directed by Carl Reiner. He played an everyday guy chosen to deliver a divine message, and there was something so clean and sincere about his presence that audiences bought it instantly. The movie was a hit. Television loved him too. Specials and concerts made living rooms feel like front row seats across the ocean. Europe tuned in as well. The image of John Denver, gentle, genuine, country but cosmopolitan, was as exportable as the songs. But smiles on stage don't always survive when the lights go cold. The cracks started small. The pressure to keep delivering hits, the schedule that never ends, the fame that never lets you stop being on. It all adds up. At home, the fairy tale with Annie Martell began to unravel. This is the part of the story that people who only know the songs sometimes don't want to hear, but it matters. That beautiful song he wrote for her didn't protect them from real-life strain. By the early 80s, the marriage collapsed. Their divorce in 1982 exposed a side of John the public hadn't seen. Anger, outbursts, a temper that could flare. Years later, in his memoir, John himself would describe episodes that shocked fans, including the now infamous story of cutting a bed in half with a chainsaw during a fight. The gentle voice on the radio belonged to a complicated man. Meanwhile, the music world was changing. The slick, synth-heavy sound of the 80s didn't leave much room for sunlit folk country ballads. John Denver, once the centerpiece of his label, suddenly felt out of step with where radio was going. In 1986, after a long and wildly successful run, his label moved on. For an artist who had sold millions, who had seemed bulletproof, it was a gut punch. He kept making music, of course, artists always do, but the spotlight had shifted. Through it all, one love never dulled, flying. The skies still felt like freedom. John was an experienced pilot by then, with ratings for single-engine planes, multi-engine aircraft, and gliders. He had logged thousands of hours and often flew himself to shows. Friends said his eyes lit up in the cockpit. He looked and felt like he belonged there. But it's a short walk from passion to risk, especially when other parts of your life feel like they're slipping away. In the early 90s, John made a series of choices that caught up with him. In 1993, he was arrested for driving under the influence. In 1994, he crashed his Porsche into a tree in another incident that raised questions about alcohol. Those moments didn't just trigger court dates, they triggered scrutiny from the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA). Pilots must maintain a medical certificate to fly, and the FAA takes alcohol history seriously. By 1997, John's certificate had been revoked, which meant he wasn't legally allowed to fly. There's a paper trail here that's frustrating to read. Letters, notices, red tape. For a time, he didn't sign for the certified mail that would make the revocation official. Eventually, he did the bottom line. To fly again, he'd need to jump through the FAA's hoops, document sobriety, comply with testing. He didn't. The personal storms weren't only about paperwork. John's second marriage, to Australian actress Cassandra Delaney, had ended in 1993 after a tumultuous stretch. Interviews and accounts from that period painted a picture of jealousy and volatility that didn't match the public's image of him. In 1994, he released his autobiography, Take Me Home, and he didn't sugarcoat much. He wrote candidly about drug use, marijuana, LSD, cocaine, about infidelity, about the temper that frightened people who loved him. Many fans were stunned. But this is important. The book wasn't character assassination from an outsider. It was John Denver telling you who he knew he was, and still, the sky called. That same restless year, he bought an experimental aircraft called a Rutan Long EZ, designed by the legendary aeronautical engineer Burt Rutan. The Long EZ is clever, efficient, fast, a kind of home-built marvel for pilots who love to tinker and fly. But the particular plane John acquired had quirks and modifications that made it harder to handle. One of the biggest issues was the placement of the fuel selector valve behind the pilot's left shoulder. Imagine flying and having to twist uncomfortably to reach a critical control. In some accounts, pilots used pliers to operate it. That's the kind of design detail that matters a lot at 1,000 feet. Now we come to the day that turned a complicated life into a cautionary tale. October 12th, 1997. John Denver took off from Monterey Peninsula Airport in California in that Long EZ, which he had reportedly acquired just the day before. The weather was fine. He practiced touch-and-go landings, a normal routine for getting acquainted with an aircraft. But beneath the calm surface were red flags, a plane with a tricky fuel system, a pilot not legal to fly pending FAA medical reinstatement, and fuel levels that would later be judged dangerously low. A short time after takeoff, something went wrong. Witnesses reported hearing a sound like a pop. The plane climbed, then yawed and pitched, and in moments it plunged into the Pacific off the coast near Pacific Grove. There was no time for heroic recovery. The altitude was too low. John Denver died on impact. In the aftermath, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, reconstructed what they could from wreckage, radio calls, and maintenance notes. Toxicology testing found no alcohol or drugs in John's system. So if the cause wasn't impairment, what was it? The NTSB reached a chillingly simple conclusion. Likely fuel mismanagement combined with the plane's awkward fuel selector placement and the pilot's unfamiliarity with the aircraft's modifications. One tank probably ran dry. John may have attempted to switch to the other tank, but the contortion required, reaching back and left while maintaining control, likely caused him to lose command of the aircraft at a treacherously low altitude. With so little room between the plane and the ocean, there was no second chance. Let's pause here, because it's tempting to compress all of it into one sentence, he crashed, and move on. But the reason this story still stings is because of how avoidable it seems. A better fuel system design, a more familiar aircraft, a simple refuel, legal clearance to fly. Any one of those changes could have interrupted the chain of events. That's why people call it one of the most preventable tragedies in music history. The loss wasn't inevitable. It was a series of choices and chances lining up on the wrong day. So here's my question to you. What was the first John Denver song that found you? Was it the gentle warmth of Sunshine on My Shoulders? The wide open joy of Thank God I'm a Country Boy? The aching honesty of I'm Sorry? Or did you stumble into the deeper cuts, the ones that live off the radio but set up camp in your soul? Drop it in the comments. Tell us where you were, who you were with, what you were feeling. Those stories matter. And as we wrap, let's remember the whole of him. John Denver wasn't just the smile, and he wasn't just the mistakes. He was a shy kid who kept moving until music gave him a place to stand. He was a son who found brief peace in the cockpit with his father. He was a husband who loved and hurt and tried and failed. He was a superstar who learned that fame can be a spotlight and a mirror. He was a pilot who chased the horizon a little too hard on a day when caution might have saved him. If this journey moved you, if it made you hear an old song in a new way, stick around. There are so many more untold stories behind the voices we think we know. Like, subscribe. Share this with someone who still hums Country Roads without thinking about it. And then, maybe tonight, step outside, look up at the sky he loved, and play your favorite John Denver track. Let it remind you that beauty and brokenness can live in the same person, and that we're all just trying to find our way home.